Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump is desperate to get everyone to stop talking about Jeffrey Epstein and that so-called client list, even as he spent basically the entire day fielding questions about it, including if his own Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who was reviewing all these materials, told him his name appeared on the list.
What did she tell you about the review? And specifically, did she tell you at all that your name appeared in the
Oh, no, she's given us just a very quick briefing. And in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen, and I would say that, you know, these files were made up by Comey. They were made up by Obama. They were made up by the Biden, you know.
Why do you think your supporters in particular have been so interested in the Epstein story and so upset about how it's been handled? Why do you think that is?
Why they would be so interested. He's dead for a long time. He was never a big factor in terms of life. I don't understand what the interest or what the fascination is. I really don't. And the credible information's been given, but I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff. It's sordid, but it's boring. And I don't understand why it keeps going. I think really only pretty bad people, including fake news, want to keep something like that going.
This whole thing blew up last week when Bondi, who has been pretty outspoken about hyping the existence of Epstein tapes and a client list and bombshell revelations, after going on TV to talk about all that was coming, then turned around and said, you know, it turns out nothing to see here. Some of Trump's most diehard supporters went somewhat predictably nuts, which led to the president sharing this rambling 400-word post, infamously beginning with, "What's going on with my boys," and in some cases, gals. He said MAGA should stop talking about Jeffrey Epstein, who never dies. That the Epstein files were written by the Dems to hurt Trump, including Obama got in there somehow. But they did not release them, which is a little tough to figure out how it was going to hurt Trump if they didn't release them. Then Trump asked about the JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. assassinations, as well as his big lie of a stolen 2020 election, which is, of course, nonsense, and then reiterates that no one cares about Jeffrey Epstein. Thank you for your attention to this matter. He was never a big factor in terms of life. You can imagine there was a full revolt in response to that post on Trump's own social media network. Some choice comments, each receiving thousands of likes, including, quote, "You promised us, sir. Putting your MAGA base down is not going to make this go away." Quote, "This statement breaks my heart, Mr. President." And quote, "This is going to cost you so many supporters, I being one of them. It appears you or a loved one was in on it and you want this to go away." It does not appear to be going away. Over the weekend, speakers at the conservative Turning Point USA conference practically had their torches and pitchforks out, demanding the Trump administration release the Epstein files.
I will not rest until we go full Jan 6 committee on the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Jeffrey Epstein was working on behalf of Intel Services, probably not American.
Who would you guys prefer, Bongino or Bonnie? Okay, 7,000 to 0.
They want Dan.
Release all the Epstein files, no matter the consequences.
How many of you are not satisfied with the results of the investigation?
I mean, even SNL comedian Rob Schneider is calling for the release of the Epstein files. But now, many of those same people are, you'll never guess, sheepishly falling right in line behind Donald Trump, who is demanding that they just stop talking about this whole boring Epstein thing that has nothing to do with it. According to one report, get this, Trump personally called Charlie Kirk, who co-founded and organized the entire conference, and then Kirk and others, I certainly softened their tone.
Plenty was said this last weekend at our event about Epstein. Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands.
I'm going to talk about the Epstein files, and I'm going to make the case that even though there are unanswered questions about Epstein, it is in fact time to move on.
Now, as conservative influencers were eating their own about Epstein, the president was stealing the show on the one-year anniversary of the day he almost lost his life. He made a triumphant appearance at a global sporting event.
I mean, what does the world come to when you cannot rely on the integrity of Charlie Kirk and Dinesh D'Souza? In fact, Fox, where Laura Ingraham was talking about that triumphant moment we're going to cover later, Fox is barely covering Epstein at all anymore. And when they do, it's to repeat Trump's spin.
He said that those files were made up by Comey and Obama, that Pam Bondi has been handling this very well, and whatever decision is made regarding the Epstein files is up to her. There was a real dust-up between Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. The president, Daddy, as Mark Rutte has dubbed him, stepped in and ended that feud the other day with a lengthy post on Truth Social.
Even FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, who was apparently so upset, so worked up, so angry and distraught and ready to quit over the Epstein stuff, didn't come to work on Friday, is back at work like nothing happened. Again, there's basically two possible explanations, right? Why the right is falling in line, dropping the story. The first is there really isn't an Epstein file, as the public understands it, some sort of like, black box with these names that's going to tell everyone who on the power elite were doing horrible things with underage girls. But the whole thing was ginned up as this absolutely depthlessly cynical exercise by a bunch of MAGA folks to throw red meat to the MAGA base and draw in the support from kind of anti-system voters, right? Skeptical of institutions, low trust voters who are very into Epstein conspiracies. That's one possibility. Depthlessly cynical. There's nothing really there. They kind of knew that. The other possibility is that Donald Trump is, at the very least, a little worried about his potential inclusion in whatever Epstein files there might be. As we have documented exhaustively on this show and repeatedly during the campaign before that, Donald Trump's links to Jeffrey Epstein go back years. There's the video of the two men dancing together and leering at women at Mar-a-Lago. There's the magazine profile from 20 years ago where Trump says Epstein likes his women young. There's one of Epstein's accusers, the late Virginia Giuffre, saying she was recruited while working at Mar-a-Lago as a teenager. Then, of course, the guy who gave Epstein his sweetheart plea deal back in 2008, Alex Acosta, was chosen by Trump to serve in his first administration, which later became a scandal. Of course, there is also Epstein talking about his friend Donald Trump. This audio comes from writer Michael Wolff, who spoke to Epstein back in 2017, 2 years before his death. These recordings were published by the Daily Beast late last year, shortly before the election, in fact. Now, we should note this audio has not been independently verified by NBC News. We don't know how it's been edited, the context particularly, but take a listen.
How do you know this?
That was close to straight. So he tells everybody what they want to hear. Not everyone's charming. And I'm telling you that I know 4 or 5 people who have recently seen them.
Again, this is 2017, right? This is before the whole thing blew up again in Trump's face, and he was arrested again, and then he charged, and then he is said to have died by suicide in federal Department of Justice custody under William Barr and Donald Trump. In response to Daily Beast, Trump's teams called those recordings a false smear as well as election interference and accused Wolff of, quote, lying for attention. But we do know from that now infamous Fox News interview that Trump, in his own words, has been concerned about releasing the Epstein files.
So if you were president, would you declassify, you can answer yes or no to these. Yeah. Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah.
Would you,
I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world.
He is concerned about the reputations of people involved and possibly named in the files and wants to protect them. That's his own. He says it's phony. I don't know.
A new poll from Gallup shows that Trump's immigration approval rating has dropped to just 35%. That number is only likely to get lower as Americans learn more about what Trump is doing to immigrants and immigrant communities. New reporting by the Washington Post finds that it is now nearly impossible for millions of immigrants to leave facilities like the Florida Everglades Detention Center, forcing them to stay in conditions like those described by the congressman, potentially for years. Washington Post with this stunning piece of reporting, quote, the Trump administration has declared that immigrants who arrived in the U.S. illegally are no longer eligible for a bond hearing as they fight deportation proceedings in court. In a July 8th memo, Todd Lyons, acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, told officers that such immigrants should be detained, quote, for the duration of their overall removal proceedings, which can take months or years. Immigration lawyers say the Trump administration is expanding a legal standard typically used to hold recent arrivals at the U.S.-Mexico border to a much broader group, including immigrants who have lived in the United States for decades. Many of them have U.S. citizen children, lawyers say, and probably have the legal grounds to defend themselves against deportation. This policy appears to be just the latest step by the Trump administration to consolidate power in the hands of ICE outside of the American court system. Washington Post adds this reporting, quote, in the past, immigrants residing in the U.S. interior generally have been allowed to request a bond hearing before an immigration judge. But Lyons wrote that the Trump administration determined that such immigrants, quote, may not be released from ICE custody. In rare exceptions, immigrants may be released on parole, but that decision will be up to an immigration officer, not a judge, he wrote. And this policy has already taken effect, with immigration lawyers reporting that their clients have been denied bond hearings in immigration courts across more than a dozen states since a memo was issued last week. That is where we start the hour. Some of our favorite reporters and friends. Washington Post national investigative reporter, MSNBC contributor Carol Leonnig is here. She is bylined on all that great Washington Post reporting we read from. Also joining us, senior opinion writer and columnist for the Boston Globe, MSNBC political analyst Kim Atkinstor is here, and Princeton University professor, MSNBC political analyst Eddie Glaude is here. Carol Leonnig, do me this favor and just take me through not just your reporting, but what it changes, because it feels like it changes something that has been standard practice, that has been, I hate to use the word norm because Trump made such a mockery of norms, but just talk about how this changes the lived reality for so many immigrant families and immigrant communities.
Nicole, you summed it up already pretty well, but I'll tell you without wanting to be breathless about it, this is a drastic overhaul of the way the U.S. government has handled immigrants coming into our country who might claim asylum, who might claim a reason why they're able to come into our country and live here. Now they're going to be detained indefinitely at taxpayer expense. And for most of the legal experts we spoke to, they're also going to be denied their due process rights to make their claim about why they should be allowed to stay here. You know, the Trump administration has, and Trump's allies have dismissed previous decades of policy as catch and release, you know, detain and release. And now they're just going to detain and detain. That's going to cost U.S. taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, and it appears that this policy change comes right in the wake of the big, beautiful bill that provides billions of dollars for exactly this, the profit of private correction facility owners and operators to detain people. Secondly, you have all sorts of folks who are no longer going to be able to get out on a bond hearing, live in America until their real adjudication of their immigration status. It will make it, as far as I can see, much easier for the Trump administration to deport people without any stops from A to Z. It'll be, we detained them, we kept detaining them, and if we want to deport them, we may do that without any warning to anyone.
Carol, let me read from the report. Forcing them to remain in detention facilities, often in far-flung areas, such as an alligator-infested swamp in Florida or the Arizona desert, would make it more difficult to fight their cases because they'll be unable to work or easily communicate with family members and lawyers to prepare their cases. Quote, I think some courts are going to find that this doesn't give non-citizens sufficient due process. That's Paul Hunker, an immigration lawyer and former ICE chief counsel in the Dallas area. They could be held indefinitely until they're deported. How do you legally create a structure where people who've committed no crimes, it sounds like they're making space for anyone just in the immigration or asylum seeking process, how do you create a legal structure where you keep those people forever and then send them to a third country? How do you avoid judicial review?
It's the $64,000 or now $64 million question, Nicole. A lot of the way in which the Trump administration has proceeded as it seeks rather desperately to meet this 3,000 a day arrest and deportation goal of Stephen Miller's and Donald Trump's. A lot of the way that it's done that is sort of create a supra law. There is not any rooting in the current legal system for doing this. Remember, last year there was a report by the federal government and by the Department of Homeland Security, responsible for all of this, saying that they didn't want to detain these individuals indefinitely. And there were 7.6 million people then on the docket seeking asylum or challenging their deportation or alleging that they should be allowed to stay in the country. Think about how large a group of people that is and how each of them have very different, different buckets of legal claims. It seems to strain credulity that we're going to have a consistent legal strategy. And if it mirrors what the Trump administration has done in its deportation of individuals that they said were the, quote, worst of the worst to an El Salvadoran prison, while a federal judge was ordering that their plane be returned and circle back to the United States. If it mirrors that, then this will be very much extrajudicial.
Kim, there's a lot of new reporting. Let me get through the reporting. There's so much to say about this, Carol Leonnig. It's whenever you think they've done the most audacious and inhumane thing, they do the next most audacious and inhumane thing. And maybe we should just stop there on that point. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, so what we're talking about the judiciary and what backstops there are to this kind of not only cruel and unusually cruel treatment, but also unlawful. I mean, the law provides, and the Supreme Court has even said, that people facing deportation must be given adequate notice and must have due process, the right, the opportunity to make their case as to why they shouldn't be deported or detained. And that clearly is not happening, in part because the same Supreme Court has consistently, right up through this week, when there is a challenge Trump policy and a lower court blocks it temporarily while the people who are challenging it can make their case, the Supreme Court swoops in and lifts that block and lifts that injunction. The Supreme Court made it more difficult, writ large, for lower court judges to even issue injunctions of broad applicability. So what the Supreme Court has been doing, telling the Trump administration and telling lower court judges, yeah, let him do what he wants, and then we'll figure out the legalities later. Problem is, the people who are in these awful detainment facilities that are being put up under short notices and, as is described, looks more like a concentration camp or a gulag inside rather than an ICE detention facility where people should get their basic needs met. It's allowing that to happen, and the harm caused to these people, their families, their communities, the places where they work, will be irreparable by the time the courts, really only the Supreme Court, because they're really the only people left empowered to review this, that's how they made it themselves, gets involved. So this is basically, there is no legal backstop at this moment, not the way that it's been created. The Trump administration has been successful in amplifying its own and spreading its own power in the executive, while the judiciary and Congress has basically whittled away.
Eddie Glaude, Stephanie Cutter said this to me after the election. She was a senior advisor to Vice President Kamala Harris. And she said, you know, at his rallies, he played videos and the press never really covered the videos. And that's fair. I never covered the videos, but they were videos of crimes committed by people in this country illegally. And they were, you know, this macabre warm-up show. I don't even know how to describe it in the context of a Trump rally. But what Trump ran on was finding the people that carried out heinous crimes in this country who were also people in this country illegally. That is not what the Trump administration's mass deportation program is accomplishing. That's what Obama accomplished, to be fair and accurate, and that was controversial in its own right, in its own time. What Donald Trump is doing is ripping people out of communities, ripping people out of high schools, hunting people at baseball practice, ripping out people who have been here for decades, ripping people out of this country whose children are home alone, scared that their parents won't come home, and alienating the likes of Joe frickin' Rogan.
And just because folks like Charlie Kirk are now saying, hey, let this go, are true believers going to do it?
So this is a moment of sincere political urgency for Trump. Back in 2021, his lead pollster, Tony Fabrizio, did a survey of the Republican electorate and found that there were a full 10% of the Republican voters who said that they believed in QAnon conspiracy theories. So the political fallout potential here is very real. That's why the White House has, and President Trump himself, have been leaning on conservative influencers like Charlie Kirk. The fact that Dinesh D'Souza, you know, who has fanned so many outrageous lies about the stolen election, about Obama's birth certificate, he's saying back off this. That really shows you that the influencers are falling in line. That doesn't mean, however,
How does that happen?
Well, it happens because a very angry president of the United States gets on the phone and yells at you. Or people from the White House really turn up the heat, which we know is exactly what's happening in this case. But that doesn't mean that the average voter, the MAGA moms and dads, are just going to forget and move on, because for years they were told, elect Trump, elect MAGA Republicans, and we won't lie to you. We will get to the bottom of all of these cover-ups that have disenfranchised you, that have put these powerful people in positions to abuse their authority and to, you know, do the most egregious, unimaginable things possible, like sexually abuse children. And now they're being told just to forget it and move on. I don't think it's that simple, but as President Trump has always done, he will find somebody else to blame for this. And already you're seeing Pam Bondi being thrown under the bus. Dan Bongino is making noise. You know, I don't know that Trump is ready to fire anybody yet. That's, you know, from what I'm told, he's very concerned about even getting somebody to replace Pam Bondi, confirmed through the Senate. So we'll just see what else happens in the next few weeks.
Well, he certainly has been very clear about his support for her so far. Ken, let me play for you what the president's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, said just yesterday.
There needs to be more transparency on this. And I think that will happen. I mean, look, I don't know what truly exists there, but I know that this is something that's important to the president as well. He hears all the noise and he hears all of the consternation out there. And I think he's going to want to set things right as well. So I believe that there will probably be more coming on this. And I believe anything that they are able to release that doesn't, you know, damage any witnesses or anyone underage or anything like that, I believe they'll probably try to get out sooner rather than later because they hear it and they understand it. So hopefully we see that happen sooner than later.
Sooner rather than later, there will be more coming, Ken. But is that, I don't know, at odds with what the FBI and DOJ said just last week?
It absolutely is, Chris. That's the problem. They took a hard look at this with an eye towards being as transparent as possible. And what the career Justice Department and FBI officials reviewing this concluded is there's nothing more they can release because what's left is material that's been sealed by judges, so they don't have the authority to release it, or that identifies child victims or other kinds of victims of sex crimes, or that makes unsupported allegations against uncharged people, which is things that the Justice Department never releases. I mean, this is a secret criminal investigation that was a massive intrusion of privacy, and these files are kept secret for a reason. But it seems clear that the political mandate here is that they got to find a way to release something. They have to throw their base a bone here. They may appoint a special secret investigation to look again at this and find some way to do something to appease the base, because it's not working. There's breathtaking cynicism and opportunism, and I would say it's on both sides now. Those House Democrats, they know better. To suggest that some of these, files involving child sex victims should be released is just incredibly cynical. They're taking advantage of an opportunity here. We understand why they're doing it, but they're really playing with fire, Chris.
Yeah, Melanie, we really didn't see a lot of folks in Congress getting involved in this until last night, and that's when Democrats tried to force this disclosure of the Epstein files and failed. Is that the end of the story on Capitol Hill? Could there be more to come?
Well, not if Democrats having any say in the matter. As Ken was pointing out, they have been very eager to capitalize on this growing rift inside Trump's coalition, a rift that does exist among Republicans here on Capitol Hill. Now, I would say most Republicans didn't want to touch this issue with a 10-foot pole. Most of them were dodging the questions when we asked them here in the hallways, and that is because it puts them in a really uncomfortable position, having to take sides between either Donald Trump, the president, or the MAGA movement. Now, there were a handful of Republicans who did come out and say they completely support Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi for how she handled this case. But there are other Republicans who have said the American public deserves more transparency. Just take a listen to some of these reactions from Republicans.
Just folks back home are not asking me about the Epstein file. That is just not my focus. I did 2 telephone town halls last week, 5,000 Kansans on both of them. This was not even brought up one time.
I think it's reasonable for the American people to ask who he sexed, trafficked these young women to, if anybody, besides himself. And if there were others involved, why they haven't been prosecuted.
Part of the problem with this issue, like so many issues, is that the longer it lingers, the greater the imagination gets, and sometimes it outpaces the reality, and that can become a big disappointment for a lot of people.
Now, there was an amendment that failed in a committee last night, but there was one Republican who crossed over with Democrats. That's Ralph Norman of South Carolina, a Freedom Caucus member. He voted with that amendment that would have forced the release of the Epstein files. And meanwhile, there are Democrats who are vowing to keep pushing ahead with this issue. Mark Veazey of Texas said he's going to introduce a resolution and try to introduce that on the floor in the coming days. So even as Trump and his allies try to turn the page on this whole saga, Democrats not going to let it go that easily, Chris.
Yeah, so Jeremy, while some big-name conservatives seem to be moving on, you have people like Laura Loomer. She wants a special counsel appointed. Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee was suggesting that Epstein's former partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, maybe should come and testify. Obviously, whatever actually is in those files, there's a pending petition in front of the Supreme Court, which would definitely make a U.S. attorney not likely to want any of that out, which may be why Laura Trump said anything they are able to release that doesn't damage witnesses or anyone underage. But bottom line, I mean, is Kevin Cramer right that the longer this goes on, the more trouble it is? They've got to get this under control.
It's not going away. And this is what Trump and the Trump Republican Party get for fanning these flames of conspiracy theories for years when most of them knew better, right? This is what you're seeing right now with a lot. I would describe it as like, the MAGA grift machine devouring itself, because you have people like Candace Owens, Laura Loomer, Tucker Carlson, opportunists, a lot of them, who are using this as an opportunity to basically grow their own audience and tell their supporters what they want to hear, which is, no, this still has legs to it. We don't know the full story here. We'll never know the full story. And that's the thing about conspiracy theories. They continue to self-perpetuate regardless of what type of concrete proof you have out there. You could have a video affidavit from Jeffrey Epstein from the grave saying, I don't have a client list. Hillary Clinton was not involved. And it still wouldn't matter. They would say it's AI. That's what conspiracy theories are. They keep going.
By very definition. Okay, Yasmin, that brings me to you. And I want to play what the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, had to say about all of this on Monday.
The American people deserve to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as it relates to this whole sordid Jeffrey Epstein matter. Democrats didn't put the Jeffrey Epstein thing into the public domain. This was a conspiracy that Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and these MAGA extremists have been fanning the flames of for the last several years. And now the chickens are coming home to roost.
So, Yasmin, we know how much MAGA voters care about this. Should it be a goal of Democrats? Should it be the goal of organizations like yours to make not just Democratic voters, but those middle-of-the-road voters who swing elections care about this too?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Leader Jeffries is exactly right. And I think this is just yet another example of what Donald Trump and House Republicans do over and over, which is tell voters what they want to hear to get elected and then do something vastly different. We're here, of course, here talking about the Epstein files, but it's also, we saw last week the single largest Medicaid cut in history. What all these things have in common is that they lie to us. And you know what Republicans, Democrats, and independents have in common is they don't like being lied to. So the question before us is, what do we do about it as Democrats? And part of the challenge before us is we know that voters, whether Republican, Democratic, or independent, they're on our side, but they're not hearing us. We're not breaking through to them. And part of that is because we're talking to voters way too late. Our conversations with them are way too superficial and one-directional. They're not about the things that they really, really care about. And that's why we've got to throw away the playbook, the old playbook, and we've got to start a radically different approach. And at Swing Left, we're working with House Democrats now on a new program called Ground Truth, which is our most ambitious effort ever to reach voters. And that's not just Democratic base voters, swing voters as well, Republican, independent, and squishy Democrats too, to make sure that starting now, over a year before the election, we are out knocking on doors and not skipping people just because they don't agree with us on everything, but really deeply listening, engaging, and trying to understand those ground truths of what do people care about and how do we make sure they know about the lies of the Republican Party that are directly going to impact their lives in materially harmful ways.
Welcome back. If it feels like the cost of things has been going up again lately, a new inflation report released just this morning confirms you are not wrong. Largely viewed as the first real show of impact from President Trump's tariff agenda, the country's 12-month inflation rate is up for a second consecutive month, hitting 2.7%. Now, it's what economists had warned was coming, not necessarily the economic doomsday at this point, but new tariff threats could wreak more havoc in the coming months. So let's get more perspective on this. Joining us now, NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans and Jason Furman, former chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors and a professor of economic policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Great to have you guys both with us. How should we interpret today's report, Christine?
Inflation picked up just a little bit in June. It had picked up a little bit in May as well, at 2.7% inflation rate. So you have paychecks that are still growing faster than inflation, so that's good for sort of our pocketbooks and our family finances. But you start to see inflation picking up in the tariff categories. You look here, toys, furniture, appliances. We're even watching exporting tickets and airfares. Those are down. That can be maybe because of consumer demand is down a little bit because of uncertainty. But this is just the very, very beginning. Economists have been telling me that they think that tariff effects, it'll take 3 months to start working through the supply chain. So you rewind 3 months, and we were back in April and May when the president first started putting these tariffs on.
Christine, you are somebody who's told me 2%. It's ingrained in my mind. 2% is the goal. And so we're at 2.7%. Jason, second month in a row, we've seen inflation tick up. If you're inside the White House on that economic team right now, how worried are you?
Look, when you're in the White House and inflation is picking up, usually it's because of something someone else is doing somewhere else in the world. Maybe there's instability in the Middle East, and that's driven oil prices down. Right now, you're sitting in the White House knowing that all of this inflation pickup is because of choices you made to raise the prices on toys, on appliances, on all these things that went up in price in June. And so I think you're wondering, what can I do to talk the president out of this?
And now it's tomatoes. That's the latest, Jason. The White House announcing a new 17% tariff on tomato imports from Mexico. It kind of seems like they're just constantly putting out a smattering of new tariffs, right? Or they're shifting the tariffs that had already been threatened out there. Some are blanket tariffs on countries. Some are targeting specific goods. What do you make of the strategy? What is the strategy? Why go after tomatoes?
Right. I mean, basically, at this point, we have tariffs on every country in the world except Russia, Belarus, and North Korea. Those are the three countries that have been spared from tariffs. Occasionally, maybe you say it makes sense. You have a really critical industry for national security. Maybe China doesn't play by the rules. But this is Mexico. They're a country we're close to. The tomato industry, not a strategic industry. Every American buys tomatoes. Every American is going to be paying more for those tomatoes because of this tariff.
Obviously, tomatoes are something grown here in the U.S., so I guess maybe this is a little bit of a high five he's throwing to farmers.
Right, but we have tariffs on bananas, on coffee, on tea, on mangoes. We make very, very little of any of those products in the United States. No one thinks we're going to have a banana and coffee industry here in the United States. So we get just the higher prices without really any benefit of it at all. And we're just seeing the beginning of those higher prices now. We're going to see more in the months to come.
And those tomato farmers might be in the United States might be happy about this because maybe the cheaper produced Mexican tomatoes, were a competition for them. But the president also in his strategy is deporting workers, right? So you could be in the situation in agriculture in particular where now you've got this help from a tariff for your product, but then you don't have the workers to help you harvest it.
That's a really good point. We also have this 30% tariff rate threatened against the EU. That could lead to higher prices when it comes to pasta and wine. Christine, does the White House not fear the impact on everyday Americans and that it's going to upset their own constituents, their voters?
This White House doesn't acknowledge that there will be an impact. They say that inflation will be muted, it will be contained, that it won't be passed on to the American consumer. But we've already seen, Wall Street Journal has seen the list of retaliation from the EU for August 1st, if all of this goes through, where you've got U.S. producers of bourbon and soybeans and all kinds of different things that could see big trade barriers put on by the European Union in retaliation. So then you've got consumers and you've got people who work in these industries or are invested in these industries who could suffer. So that's what we're really worried about, is that actual trade war where both sides start really lobbing these tariff missiles that can really be detrimental, I think, for the economy, for growth, for jobs, and for what people pay.
I want you guys to listen to what President Trump said yesterday in the Oval Office about any potential ongoing tariff negotiations with other countries. Take a look.
I watched the show this morning. They were talking about, well, when's he going to make the deal? The deals are already made. The letters are the deals. The deals are made. There are no deals to make.
So just a day earlier, Trump's economic council director, Kevin Hassett, had said conversations were ongoing. He said the tariffs were only real if the president doesn't get the deals he wants. Christine, are negotiations happening or not?
I mean, they are happening, but you also heard Kevin Hassett, one of his advisors this week, say that they present the president with the progress they've made, and the president sometimes decides that that's just not good enough. And the letters are now the deals. And in some cases, these letters are back to where we were in April in terms of just slapping a tariff on a country. It is a complicated and stop and start situation. We've got a lot of deadlines and then pause deadlines. And I think one of the reasons why consumers certainly haven't probably felt it yet, the markets have seemed to be shrugging much of this off. But there is a feeling there's sort of a calm before the storm here if these big tariffs do go in and start to bite.
We're already starting to see that inflation tick up. So, Jason, if these letters are meant to be leverage in any kind of negotiations, I mean, can you just kind of pull it all back on a dime if things work out? I mean, does it work that way? Is it that easy?
I mean, you'll still do some damage even if you pull things back now because of all the uncertainty. Businesses did things like they imported enormous amounts of stuff to get in ahead of the tariffs. Now they're going to be buying less stuff. That's going to create some strange dynamics in the economy. But the other thing we should understand about these letters is it's like shooting yourself in the foot and simultaneously shooting the other person in the foot to gain leverage. And these countries are looking.
Explain that. Why?
Because we're raising prices on ourselves. This isn't like we're just attacking them and, they're getting hurt and we're not. In a lot of these cases, we're the ones who are getting hurt from these tariffs. So other countries are looking at this. They're saying, how long will America really stick with this? By the way, other countries also have their own domestic politics. They can't just hand over tons of stuff to Donald Trump and then go back to their voters. In France, they believed France first. In Japan, they believed Japan first. The whole world doesn't believe in America first. So he's going to have a hard time getting deals. And we saw that with China, where he basically backed down because they threatened us. And it turned out they had a lot of tools in their arsenal to go after the United States that he hadn't counted on and planned for.
And now we hear the EU is planning to look elsewhere also for boosting trade in other ways with other countries. And so America may end up seeing those unintended consequences as well. Guys, thank you so much for the discussion. And there's always a new development, it feels, these days on the economic front here. Christine Rome and Jason Furman, good to see you both.
Yesterday, the conservative majority on the United States Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration can, for now, move forward with its plans to dismantle the Department of Education, which, I know there is a lot of stuff going on. We've talked about a lot of it on the show, but that is a very, very big deal that is going to hit a lot of people in this country very hard. For one, it's unclear whether Trump can even legally do that, so we'll say that. There's a case on that matter that is currently moving through the lower courts. And what the Supreme Court did was effectively step in and say, before you decide if that's legal, we're going to allow it for the time being. So there's that. And if that wasn't concerning enough, this is the part that concerns me the most. The ones who will bear most of the brunt are our country's most vulnerable students. And we are just weeks away from kids going back to school in many parts of the country. Because despite what some conservatives might say, the Education Department does not dictate woke curricula for schools. In fact, it does not set any curricula at all. The department primarily helps fund programs that support low-income students, as well as students with disabilities. And the 5 states that will be hit hardest by these cuts all happen to be states that Trump won. The Department of Education is also responsible for enforcing civil rights law and overseeing student loans and grants. And if the Trump administration does indeed fire nearly 1,400 staffers, which is the stated plan, many of those essential programs that people across the country rely on will likely collapse. The firings themselves are just one step towards Trump's stated goal for the Department of Education, which is to shut it down completely. And what might come of that is more inequality and a further divided, scattershot approach to education in this country. Joining me now is Peggy Flanagan. She began her career in government by serving on the City of Minneapolis Board of Education. I think she was the youngest person on the Board of Education before he even had kids, which is a cool detail. She's currently the Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota and is also running for the Senate seat being vacated by Senator Tina Smith. And I want to talk to you all about that. But you were coming in today, and with these Department of Education actions, I just wanted to ask you first about that. You've worked on education on a local level. As I mentioned, they do not set the curricula. But what could the impact of this be if it is followed through?
So I think it's just the combined chaos of multiple things that are happening. The dismantling of the Department of Education, as you said, that's been established to protect students, the most vulnerable students, students with disabilities, students who need a little extra help. It's inhumane and it's cruel, and states are going to have to, pick up the slack, and we will do as much as we can, but we can't do it all. What I'd say, combined with the $6.8 billion that they have clawed back from grants that have already been committed in school districts, right? And school boards have already set their budgets for the year. This is after-school programming, childcare, support for our English language learners. As a recovering school board member, but also as a mom of a middle schooler, this is straight up chaos for families who are already trying to plan the upcoming school year and what will happen in less than a month. We're already buying school supplies and planning for it. So I think what it really just demonstrates, the Trump administration, Secretary McMahon, the folks who are making these decisions, they don't care about us and real folks who are making decisions about their child's education every single day.
I keep thinking, and I'm sure you do, about the impact of this combined with the cuts to SNAP benefits. And all of that is going to, I mean, dramatically impacts kids, right? I mean, who were like in low-income families. It's horrible. But how do you look at that? And I mean, Minnesota has a different, you have better protections than a lot of states, but how do you look at that in states where they're going to suffer the SNAP benefits cuts and also maybe these cuts to after-school programs, all of these things that are preventing kids in lower-income families from really moving forward?
I mean, as someone who grew up with a different colored lunch ticket on free and reduced price lunch, I can tell you that's one of the most important things that our administration has ever done, making sure that every kid gets fed at school, no questions asked. You don't have to ask, do you have enough money in your account, but would you like, chicken or do you want pizza today? Those should be the only questions that we are asking our children as they're going through the lunch line. The impact of this combined with the SNAP cuts, we are literally taking food away from children. And if folk thinks, oh, I'm not on SNAP, this doesn't impact me. Well, it impacts farmers in our communities who grow that food that keeps food on the table. It impacts local economies. That difference of taking that food assistance away from folks, and let's be clear, people have an idea of who is someone who was on SNAP. It is children, it's families, it's seniors in our communities. This is going to hit everybody. And I just think we do not have enough people working in Washington who have relied on SNAP to keep food on the table, Medicaid for their health, insurance. We need more folks who understand what it's like to grow up on the margins, to struggle, who are representing us here, because right now, these people are so out of touch, and this inhumane, big baloney bill that was just passed, we should be raising our voices in every single way that we can, pushing back and demanding more.
So let's talk about your Senate race, because you bring, you're somebody, you just mentioned part of your background. I think I knew, but I'm not sure I knew, and probably people watching didn't know. You would also be, and I know you're not running to make history, but there's never been a Native woman in the Senate, which is kind of wild. Tell me about what you're hearing from people as you're campaigning about their concerns about the big ugly bill, about their concerns about what they're not seeing in Washington that they want to see.
Absolutely. I think that folks are really clear what it is that they want. They want someone who's going to show up and work for them. For a long time, I think Democrats have been fighting to a draw or picking fights that we can win instead of saying, what do our communities need and what should we be fighting for? What's that vision? I think Congress, lowering the price of 10 prescription drugs for folks on Medicare, that's great. And why not all of them? A $15 minimum wage should be the floor. Some dude sitting behind a desk at a health insurance company shouldn't be able to make the decision whether you live or die. Your doctor should decide. These are the things that people are asking for. And I think this is the big vision that we need. There are a lot of folks who, frankly, even in my own party, who are bought by corporations. I think it's real people who need representation right now, and that's why I'm running. As someone who grew up in a working class family, we need folks who understand what that's like representing us in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm not saying you were referring to her. You are in a primary, so you have to run in a primary, and one of the people you're running against, Angie Craig, who's a congresswoman. What is the what should people understand? I'm sure you know each other. This is the thing about primaries, but what should people understand about the difference in your approaches and what they would be voting for if they support you over her?
Absolutely. Well, I made a decision to not take corporate PAC money because I think, corporations have plenty of representation here in Washington. It is everybody else who needs it. I've spent my entire career working on behalf of children and families and making sure that families have economic security. It's not just my occupation, it has been my vocation. We have support from over 50 local and state elected officials all across the state of Minnesota, which I think speaks to the work that I've done for 20 years of my life in my career. And people need someone who understands what it's like to feel like the bottom could fall out at any moment. That's why I'm running. I'm running for families who will be impacted by these cuts to SNAP, who are going to worry about what this means if they don't have access to Medicaid. We need someone who's going to fight for all of us to make sure that we're not just scraping by, but that we have a real opportunity to thrive in Minnesota and all across this country. And that's what's missing in this moment. And I hope to be at the table making those decisions.